Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me and see me okay? Okay. I'm John Baza. I'm the Director of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And for everyone's benefit, we have moved over to the replacement link for the board hearing, the one that was to go live at 10 o'clock. Hopefully, we're getting information out to people so that they'll be joining us at this link, but we should be streaming out to YouTube on that link right now. We'll start our briefing this morning with a update on our Environmental Excellence Awards. And to do that, I've asked Holly Brown, our PIO, to provide you with information on the process so far and what the board can expect for the next couple of months. Go ahead, Holly.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Like John said, my name is Holly Brown, and I'm the Public Information Officer for the division. So as you know, we always have the Environmental Excellence Awards about this time every year. And so we've received 6 nominations. We sent out a request from January to February, and last Friday was the deadline. And so since then, we've received 6 nominations. 3 are for oil and gas, 2 are for minerals, and there's 1 for coal. So I know that Board Secretary Julianne Carter sent out those nominations to all of you the other day. So usually the next step is to have our at the March board hearing, we would normally have a lunch and kind of go over the nominations, but obviously due to COVID, that will not be happening this year, unfortunately. So I guess my question to the board members is how you would like to proceed with reviewing the nominations, and because then the next step is that the April hearing is to have those selected come and give a formal presentation. So, Mr. Chairman, do you have a preference on how we should proceed with this? Mm-hmm.
But I've just that seems very reasonable to me, as long as we do our pre-read and then we can have a good discussion.
Okay. So I guess my understanding then is that we will proceed and just have a Google Meet during the regularly scheduled lunch, and then just kind of discuss that. I will make sure to include Deputy Directors Dana Dean and Bart Kettle, who will kind of go over those nominations for their specific programs, and then we can make a decision, and then I can notify the nominees who will be joining us in April. Okay. So with that is everything I have on the Environmental Excellence Awards, and I will look forward to visiting with you in March.
Thank you so much, Holly. Appreciate that, all the hard work you put into that. It is something that the board established quite a few years ago, and we do want to make sure the board understands that we are glad to administer the program for you, but the acceptance of awards and the consideration of those awards we leave in the board's hands. It is your awards, after all. The next thing on our briefing agenda is to discuss date, and we're going to divide this into 2 parts. The first part will be Natasha Baliff, our Legislative Liaison and Policy Coordinator, who will give you an update on legislation that's moving through. We're now in the next to the last week of the legislature. So she'll talk about that, and then I'll chime in after she's finished and talk about the appropriations process. So I'll turn the time over to you, Natasha.
All right. Good morning. This has been an odd year, and I feel like a lot of the bills have already been passed and are on the way to being signed by the governor. We do have a week and a half left, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But the mineral and rock amendments, it's HB 79. That has been passed and is getting signed by the governor. And I guess a little background on that. We had a bill last year that dealt with basalt, and this was just clarifying that definition as well as a couple other definitions. There were two open and public meeting amendments, SB 72 and SB 125, both passed and are being signed by the governor. So one of them says that there's no voting in a closed meeting, and the other one says that meetings can happen with no anchor location. So I'm curious if that would eliminate the need to read off what you had just read off, Chris. Another bill is SB 133. It's a severance tax revenue amendments. This one for oil, gas, and mining, this would replace our general funds with the severance tax. This one has been passed. It was specifically in a committee meeting, the House Taxation and Revenue Committee. It passed out of there, and now it's on the third reading calendar for the House. And then another bill that I think you guys might find interesting is it's called the Natural Resource Entities Amendments. It's HB 346, and this one actually brings the Office of Energy Development over to DNR. It also splits up our Division of Parks and Recreation into two separate divisions. So it would be the Division of Parks and the Division of Recreation. And that one is currently still in the House. It's also on the third reading calendar. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the bills that we're watching. Do you guys have any questions? Want any more information on any of the bills? I'm happy to provide anything, ask any questions. All right, sweet. Then I pass my time back over to John.
Okay, in order to do the briefing on the appropriations process, I am going to share my screen, and I think I can do this. Hopefully I'm proficient enough to get this done. So you should all be seeing something called Legislative Update Appropriations. Am I getting a thumbs up on that? Okay. All right, so to walk you through, and I know that I haven't done this regularly or even often enough with the board, but to walk you through the appropriations process, I thought I'd give you kind of the chronology of what happens during the fiscal year. So we have our fiscal year start on July 1st. That represents the current year budget, the one that is appropriated by the legislature during the previous session. And so we start the fiscal year out, we close out the previous year's fiscal year's finances, and that all occurs in that July-August timeframe. So starting in September and October, we begin a budget prep for the coming fiscal year, the one that would come next. So this last September and October, we started preparing for the fiscal year that starts this July 1st in 2021. We submit our recommendations to the executive branch through DNR and on to the governor's planning office. And then usually in December, the governor releases his proposed budget. That was delayed this year, obviously, with the new governor taking over. That didn't come out until early January at this point. But that then goes over to the legislature, and it represents the governor's recommendations and proposal for establishing a state budget. So then in February, each agency then goes before their separate legislative appropriations subcommittee the requests that have been put in for both their normal operating budget and then any increases in budget that were included in the governor's proposed budget. Usually at the end of that process, after all agencies have reported to their subcommittees, the subcommittee chairs then go before the Executive Appropriations Committee and present their recommendations as a subcommittee to EAC. We did our presentation to our subcommittee on February 2nd. So a couple of the slides I'm showing you today represent slides that we took from that presentation. The chairs gave their presentation to EAC on February 12th, which was a Friday. And now EAC has all of those recommendations from all of the subcommittees, and they have to make decisions on what a full and complete state budget will look like. It looks like the next meeting of the EAC occurs this Friday evening, starting at 6 p.m. It is gripping in terms of how it affects individual agency budgets, but unless you kind of know the ins and outs of it, it's not going to be very interesting to watch. So just wanted to let you know that. So then in March, the legislation appropriation process is finalized. The legislature votes on it before they adjourn. And in this case, they'll be adjourning next Friday. And then July comes again, and we start a new fiscal year with the appropriated budget that we obtained from this current legislative session. So this one is kind of hard to read, but this was one of the charts we showed to our subcommittee, and it is the current budget that's approved for the fiscal year that we are in, the one that ends on June 30th of 2021. There's a revenue chart, and then there's two expenditure charts that are broken out. First one is by category. For example, it shows personal services as a major category of expense for the division. And then the bottom pie chart shows program expenditures. And the largest program expenditure for the division is in abandoned mines, which is 23%. But that's because they obtained so many federal grants to do their closures that it represents a big chunk of what we spend each year. You'll see that there's a little slice of the wedge called the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining, which is less than 1% of the total division expenditures. So in 2021, what we presented to our committee was that we had a couple of key priorities, and both of these priorities were indicated by the audit of fall of 2019, and we acted on those during 2020, and we've actually used those as our main priorities for 2021. First is use technology to make data-driven decisions and to manage the division's time effectively, and to make sure that we're using the state budget as it is intended. The second priority is to enhance our compliance and enforcement activities and reduce liabilities to the state, both in the short term and in the long term. So we had three what are called building block requests that were included in the governor's budget that reflect our priorities. And I'll talk about them individually. These are increases to our base budget, and that's why they're referred to as building blocks. So the first one is data improvement. And what we were asking for in data improvement was the authority to spend $250,000 more in the current fiscal year, the one that we're in right now, and then $250,000 a year of ongoing starting next fiscal year. And this would be coming from the restricted account for oil and gas, and it is to continue the work that we're doing to deliver data tools to both our staff and for our external stakeholders who rely on adequate website, adequate electronic processes from the division. The second building block we asked for was in addition to the Attorney General staff that supports us. Obviously, we have Mike Begley, that is the board's attorney. We have Haley, which is the division's attorney, and we have other attorneys that serve the division and the board's purposes part-time. So we were asking for an additional legal counsel staff to pursue these enforcement actions that we indicated as were high priority to us. The last building block we asked for was to address revenue shortfall. And this is because when we project out what we think our budgets are going to be, we're trying to do that anywhere from 12 to 18 months into the future. When we looked at this back in the September and October timeframe, we thought we were going to be well short of our appropriation only because prices were down for commodities in oil and gas, and we had seen production slip because of some limited activity by industry during the COVID crisis. That has come back since then. So some of our predicted shortfalls that we asked for these building blocks for didn't materialize. In fact, you'll see on the bottom table, during the current fiscal year, rather than the predicted shortfall of close to $1.5 million that we were thinking for the current year, it is now down to closer to $360,000. And similarly, as we look out towards the future, it is a bit rosier than what we were expecting last fall. So these predicted shortfalls are hard to predict. They're volatile. What we were thinking 4 months ago could come to pass again 4 months from now. But it's our best guess at trying to ask for the money that we think we need to run the programs. And you can see that to cover that revenue shortfall, we were asking for additional monies from the general fund. So I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, but I just wanted to mention to you that our subcommittee chairs reported to EAC, and unfortunately, our first two building blocks, which was for the data enhancement and for the revenue shortfall, didn't fare well. The revenue shortfall ended up very low on the priority list. The data enhancement didn't show up at all. And the attorney generals, that was the other one, that ended up very low on the list as well. So the one bright hope that we have is, Natasha mentioned Senate Bill 133. That is working its way through the legislature right now. It is a bill that has been pushed for and lobbied hard by the trade associations, the UMA and the Utah Petroleum Association, principally because there was a move afoot in the legislature to look for additional fees to put on industry. And rather than trying to generate additional fees from the agencies, the request is to allocate a certain amount of severance tax that already comes into the state, that is already being paid by industry, to the agencies that have responsibilities in oil and gas and mining. So that would include us primarily, the Utah Geological Survey, the Division of Air Quality, and the Division of Water Quality over at DEQ. So all of those agencies would receive a restricted account with some percentage allocation out of severance tax. The substitute bill that came in after the initial draft was put out there indicated that general funds would be offset and supplanted with any allocations into these restricted accounts. That wasn't anticipated initially, but it has come to pass. And so what that indicates is that any dollars we would get in the restricted account, we would probably have withdrawn from our division budget from general funds. So that's a quick overview of the appropriations process. I would like to engage board members in the future as we go through the budget preparation and the planning for the coming year. I haven't done that in the past, but I think it would be wise if you as board members would understand what the division's challenges are. And we can do it similar the way we're doing stakeholder meetings for rulemaking. Maybe one or two board members would be willing to work on that as a separate work group. But in any case, I want to keep you informed of the process going forward. And at this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and answer any questions that you might have on the appropriations process.
John, I know we get money from royalties off of federal lands. President Biden signed an executive order saying no drilling on executive lands. How's that going to affect royalties going forward with the state of Utah? I looked at the stuff that you sent out, and 57% of our drilling is on federal lands.
That's correct, Susan. And obviously that's going to have an impact on federal activity, federal drilling, federal leasing, federal production going forward. The hard part is no one really knows how much of an impact. It's kind of a wait and see game to see what is going to happen during this first 6 months to a year of the Biden administration. I did want to clarify something though. Even though the state of Utah gets half of the federal mineral royalties that come in to the federal coffers, our division specifically doesn't get any of that. The allocations that we get are either from the conservation tax, which is a 0.2% tax on the value of oil and gas, or we get some additional federal monies through grant allocations, or we get general funds. So in terms of the division's finances, it won't affect us directly, but indirectly, as production begins to curtail and additional drilling doesn't happen on federal lands, if it's not made up for by the drilling on private and state lands, we could see an overall decline in production in the state, which will affect our revenue stream over time.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
John, you don't. I'm sorry. The federal production doesn't pay into the conservation tax, do they?
No, it doesn't. Well, yes, it does. I take that back.
Okay.
Any production in the state of Utah has a severance tax. This is oil and gas, and it also has a conservation levy placed on it, which helps run our program. So that's any production that occurs in the state. But the royalties that Susan was mentioning only occur on federal lands.
Thank you.
Yes.
I can
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, just a quick question.
Yes.
Memory serves me that we have requested funding for database improvements for several years, I want to say. And recollection also serves me that the first time we saw this, your people presented justifications for that seemed to be very compelling to making the division more efficient, more cost effective. It seems like there were some payouts. Can you refresh our memory on that, please?
Most definitely. And those requests for funding have come sporadically over the years. Probably the first one that I can remember was clear back in the mid 2010 decade when we asked for dollars to develop our electronic production reporting and electronic reporting systems. That has come with requests over the years to change to what is called a risk-based data management system, which is a nationwide database system that we're now currently using that is supported by all the states which have oil and gas production. Those are done principally because we have a partnership with the Groundwater Protection Council, which is a national organization, and they have the ability to leverage federal dollars to improve data systems across the states. And so we get the advantage of cost sharing with the GWPC and those federal dollars so that every dollar we put in, we actually get more than that in return because GWPC provides a lot of the programming dollars to us as well. So we've gotten some great results out of that over the years. And I think that the arguments for data enhancement are still very compelling. I don't think anyone is arguing for that. What the legislative fiscal analyst has pointed out to the subcommittee is that he believes that there are dollars within our budget that we can spend within our existing appropriation, that we don't have to ask for extra money. We are not sure that that's true. We think that there's a little bit of money in savings that we can come up with, but we will have to look over the next 6 to 12 months whether we're capable of achieving that with the dollars that are already in our appropriation. If not, we may be back in front of the legislature next January asking for additional money just so we can keep that process going.
I mean, that's disappointing to me, if I may say so on the record. That does the analyst provide you with anything more than his belief? Does he give you any specifics?
Well, he's highlighted certain non-lapsing accounts that we have in the division, which actually are earmarked for other purposes. And he is suggesting that those might be the place to draw money from at this point.
Okay. Thank you, John. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Other board members, comments, questions? Seeing none, Mr. Buzz, I appreciate the invitation to have board members participate in shareholder meetings in the future when you're going through your budget. I think that's a great idea, something we should probably implement if that's what you're willing to do.
Yes, I'd like to have those discussions with you over the next several months. And if it's an idea that bears fruit, then probably in the August, September timeframe, we'll be reaching out to have you involved in some of those internal meetings.
Mr. Boz.
Thank you. Go ahead, Luan. Excuse me.
Who is your current legislative analyst?
From the LFA's office, it is Yvonne Jomboff, and from the governor's office, it is Evan Curtis.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, shall I go on to the last briefing item we've got?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm sorry I took so much time with that, but I'd like to turn some time over to Bart Kettle, our Deputy Director for Oil and Gas, and he's actually going to go into more detail on some of these data enhancements that we're talking about, both the ones we've recently implemented and looking ahead. So Bart, if you're on, please go ahead and take it away.
Yes, thank you, Director Baza. Before I start, if I could get a little bit of direction on the amount of time the board would like to spend on this, where we're nearing the 10 o'clock hour, that would be helpful.
Well, I guess, Mr. Kettle, what would your full presentation time look like?
I'm estimating 10 minutes for a full presentation.
Board members, do you have any problem with hearing out his full presentation?
I would like to hear it.
I agree. Please proceed with your full presentation, Mr. Kettle.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully I'm now sharing my screen. As I go through the screen share, it kind of hides it for me and it makes it a little difficult. So thank you, Mike. So the first thing I want to talk about is the year that became 2020. We've heard that in many aspects, how it's kind of been this uncertain year. And so we tried to represent that with success and uncertainty, kind of the roller coaster ride that was 2020. And the couple of things I want to push out is, for starters, our staff was very intuitive on how to deal with things, and they gave us the ability to have some flexibility and make it through this year. The second thing that I really want to highlight is some of the previous work done to make our processes electronic and automated allowed us to go into this telecommute world we've lived in since March almost seamlessly. And so those were a big boost for us. And we're trying to find ways to kind of move forward with ideas that will help us into the future, such as those electronic permitting and electronic processing things that was implemented in the past. So with that, I'm going to highlight two things today that have made a big difference for the division, two data enhancement projects. One is inspection prioritization application. The board has heard about that previously. The second is electronic inspection reports implemented by the Minerals program. So inspection prioritization technology, I'm sure the board will recall, it's a report and a spatial map driven tool that helps our inspectors see sites that need to be inspected and get them on their weekly or daily inspection list and go conduct inspections at that site. And in the past year, since this has been deployed, we've dropped from an average of 500 days between inspections at oil and gas wells to 341 at the end of 2020. And I think probably more important than the drop in average of days is the concept that we know exactly where we are in our inspection status month to month now. And we've actually had several significant events in 2020 that we can track, and we can see how they impacted our days between inspections and how they're impacting our inspection staff. So moving on, I want to talk about how efficient government eliminates risk. And as I spoke previously, the Minerals program developed a electronic inspection form in-house. And with the implementation of that, documentation increased 92% from 2018 to 2020. And this project was so successful by the Minerals program that the oil and gas program is now taking steps to adopt what they did with their survey form and implement it into our program. And I apologize, I need to jump back to the previous slide in inspection prioritization and also note that kind of the same thing happened in the Minerals program, seeing the success that we were having in the oil and gas program, and are now underway developing an inspection prioritization program for the mines that they oversee in that program. So a couple of things I want to highlight, how efficient government enables industry. When we have kind of, as Director Baza highlighted previously, these data-driven decision abilities, it helps us in prioritizing our workloads so we can meet the needs of industry in moments of time. It helps us limit the risk by being at the right place at the right time. And then it also helps us know what non-compliance items we need to be paying attention to and get those addressed. And so as we move forward into 2021, we have several projects we're hoping to see to the completion. One is we'll have an automated dashboard that actually will be available this year. We're finishing up the final testing processes on it. And so that will kind of help us prioritize our workloads with that information being automated to us, real-time data. Another project that we're working on will be a module that will help us and our management of idle wells in the state. And then also automating the compliance process for us and kind of cutting down some of the manual steps we have to take on it and providing us with some automated reminders. And so if I can, what I'd like in those projects too for the board is think about a dusty room full of encyclopedias. And if you think about that, encyclopedias in their day were a very, very valuable tool. They were the source of information. So why would it be a dusty room today? Well, because the World Wide Web come along, encyclopedias really aren't the go-to for information anymore. It's the internet. And so what we want to do is something very similar to what's been done with information in encyclopedias. We have the databases, we have the information available to us. We've taken steps, both literally and figuratively, to get that on the internet. Our webpage represents that. But the next step we want to go to is going where the internet's gone, in putting that information on a smartphone so we have instant access to it and we can fully be empowered by it, just like the internet has done, or smartphones have done for the internet. So moving on to 2021, I want to talk a little bit about executive orders. And I know that some questions came up in the previous presentation. And I'll cover through this first part a little bit quickly since some of the discussion's already gone there. But one of the executive orders targets federal leasing. And so just informationally, pending applications for permits to drill in the state. As you can see from the graph, 66% of them have a federal component to them. If we move over to approved applications for permit to drill, we see that 76% have some sort of federal minerals component to them versus 24% that do not. And to maybe help the board understand what this might mean in context, this pie chart just shows oil and gas wells in the state by mineral ownership. And as you can see in the state of Utah, nearly 56% of wells have a federal mineral ownership component to them. Those of you that track ownership in the state very closely will recognize that federal lands occupy about 65% of the state's surface. So a little discrepancy there. But to maybe get a little further into it, I want to show 4 counties with some of the most wells in the state. So I'll pause for just a second because I can see several people looking at the graph. Give you a moment to think about the breakdown. So 55% federal, 18% Indian, 15% state, and 10% fee in the state.
Bart, would you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
The one on the left, pending applications for permit to drill, that adds up to 110%.
You're right, Susan, it does.
Which number is incorrect?
It would be the 66, but I'm not sure why it's incorrect because it should be automatic on there.
Seems like it would be 56 if it's compared to the federal lands, but.
Susan, I'll get back to you on that, but I believe it's 44% of them are federal APDs. And let me get back to you on that. I'll follow up on the numbers.
The reason for the question is the federal permits, if they're pending, does Biden's executive order say they can't be approved?
It could say that, yes, depending on if you followed it closely, the federal component would include Indian minerals in it as well. And some of those may be Indian minerals and may be excluded in actions that have occurred since the initial executive order.
So
the actual graph, the pie itself looks like 56%. So that's probably the right answer.
Probably, Rich. I think that would be my guess as well. But I'm just saying, does that mean that 56% of our pending applications to drill are going to be canceled? And that's what I don't understand.
No, I don't think it necessarily says that, Susan, although it does say there could be some process affected in those applications.
Bart, doesn't the executive order apply to leases, not permits, but if you have a lease in hand, you're able to go forward and get your permit to drill? Isn't that the distinction? It's leasing, not permitting?
Well, some of the decision making that could affect permitting down the road, as I understand it, has been affected as well, but it's primarily based at leasing, yes.
Ms. Sousa, you have a comment, question?
So my understanding is that there's two. There's a secretarial order, that's Secretarial Order 3395, and that's the one I think that you're referring to, Chris. And then there's the executive order, and that's Executive Order 14008. So the executive order is the one that puts the pause on the leases. But there was also this secretarial order that revokes DOI's ability to approve APDs. But that one is limited in duration. So it's only effective for 60 days. And it's anyone's guess whether or not it will be extended or renewed. We're probably coming up on 60 days here pretty quick.
Yeah, I thought the 60-day expiration was March 20th or March 22nd when that would expire. Thank you. Go ahead. Further questions or discussions? Well, Barb, why don't you go ahead and keep going?
Okay, so looking at oil and gas wells by mineral ownership, again, just for a memory refresher, 55% federal, 18% Indian, 15% state, and 10% fee. So if we look at a couple of the main counties in the state by mineral ownership and wells, we'll start out with San Juan County, where we see 67% of the wells in San Juan County have Indian mineral ownership. And I think worth noting is in the upper portion of the pie, we have a sliver there that was too small to label. That represents 1.7% of the well bores, which are state minerals. If we compare that to Carbon County, where there is no Indian mineral ownership in the county, and nearly 35% of the wells are state ownership, we can see the difference in the two counties and how it may affect the two counties very differently, depending on executive orders. Moving on to wells in Duchesne and Uinta counties, often referred to as the Uinta Basin, kind of signifying one community or one economic community, if you will. We can see the difference between Uinta and Duchesne is quite significant. For starters, in Uinta County, 67% of the wells are federal well bores. And in Duchesne County, nearly 36% of the wells have Indian minerals in them. But where I really want to draw the board's attention would be the tiny red slivers at the top of both pie charts. It might appear that these are a print error, but if you look at the bottom, it's labeled as mixed. And I think the board can appreciate this probably as much as anybody out there. In Utah, land ownership is very complex. And as the board knows, most of the development that's currently occurring is long horizontals, often 2 miles in length in Utah. And if you drill 2 miles in length in Utah, it is increasingly more common that you would cross more than one mineral ownership in that process. And so what these mixed represent is well bores that have at least 2 mineral. Now, when you look at those slivers, they seem really insignificant. 0.1% is what they represent of the total well bores. And that seems fairly small. But the thing that I think is worthy of pointing out is these represent a fairly high percentage of the horizontal well bores in the state. And what I might point out to the board is these horizontal wells are often brought on in pads, in many cases 8 wells at a time. It's not unheard of for those wells with the flush production to represent up to 10% of the state's production in any given period of time. And so there we see, even though it's a small percentage of the wells in the state, they can have a significant impact on production volumes of the state and the industry trends as a whole. So kind of in conclusion, how do the extraction industries fit into the future? It's a good question. It's obviously a question that was asked quite a bit previously in Director Boz's presentation, the couple of items that we know, the current administration's approach has been more aggressive than we may have previously presumed. And the other thing that I think is noteworthy is the 30 by 30 agenda, essentially preserve 30% of public lands by 2030. Where that's challenging is determining mineral potential is always difficult, but what we know is if it's unavailable to evaluate, then it won't be, the potential won't be determined. And so to liken back to my example I gave at the start of the presentation, we've made the information in encyclopedias available on smartphones. It's through some of that mineral extraction and the energy from the extractive industries, those things are available. How do we march forward knowing that we have some of these changes underway for ourselves as regulators and for the industry as a whole? And so with that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Bart. Board members, do you have additional questions or comments on Mr. Kettle's presentation? Ms. Garrison.
Bart, I want to go back to the priorities sheet. Who, and you've probably told us before, who sets the priorities? Is it an objective spreadsheet sort of thing? Or, you know, I'm seeing that the priorities are in areas. I'm just wondering how you set a priority.
Oh, okay, for inspection prioritization.
Right.
Okay, inspection prioritization is based on two input criterias. One is geographic items. That data is collected by GIS layers. So state agencies have various GIS layers. Those are ranked based on perceived risk, and they're combined with an operational input, which comes from our database. And so the items that are scored on the geographic side are groundwater, surface water, and the human population component. On the operational side, it is the compliance history of the well. It is the time since last inspected, and it's the specifics on the well, its production status, and the age of the well.
Thank you.
Bart, this is John. If I could add to that, Levon, the process is automated so that when an inspector, say, opens up their computer or their tablet, each day they will see the priorities laid out for them the way Bart has described it on the criteria that's been input through our databases. So it is very much an automated system.
Do you prioritize federal and tribal wells? Or are you only talking SITLA and fee?
The wells that are prioritized are the wells that the division has the primary inspection responsibility for. And so it depends on the various dynamics involved in them. They could have a tribal component to them, but if they are a tribal mineral, tribal surface component, they most likely would not be prioritized.
Thank you.
Mr. Church.
Yes, Bart, on your pie chart that gave the percentages of pending applications to drill, do you have a ballpark number of what the real number of actual pending permits are?
Mr. Church, I was actually trying to go run that down in the conversation. I wasn't able to get it in time, but I can definitely get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments, we appreciate your presentation, Mr. Kettle, and John will please proceed.
Mr. Hansen, Mr. Chairman, board members, I think I've taken up my allotted time this morning. I want to thank you for your engagement and your input and the questions you've asked. We want to be as transparent as possible with what the division's doing, and if you ever have any questions, please reach out to me and I'm happy to answer those. You don't have to wait for the next board meeting. So that's all I have this morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Baza. As noted in our agenda, typically we would have an opportunity for the public to make comment, but as this is an electronic meeting, those public comments are accepted until 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, or were accepted until 11:59 Tuesday, February 23rd. And there'll be no public comment accepted during the electronically conducted hearing. So at this time, we'll take a quick break. I think maybe 10 minutes would be appropriate to allow everybody to take care of whatever matters they need to, and then we'll come back at 10:30 and start the hearing portion of today's meeting. So we're off the record until 10:30. Thank you. We will proceed. No? Uh-oh. Are you able to hear me? Okay. Board members, can you hear me? All right. Michelle or court reporter, are you ready to go? Great. Thumbs up there. We will go ahead and proceed with the hearing portion of today's agenda. And the first matter, docketed matter, is docket number 2021-004, cause number 136-08, in the matter of notice of agency action by the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining seeking an order forfeiting the reclamation bond provided by JMD Energy, Inc. for reclamation of the JMD 12-4-4-3 well and other related relief. I think at this time we would take appearances of counsel, and I see that Mr. Lyons is representing the division.
That's correct. I'm here for the division. Can you hear me?
We're having a little difficulty here. We have our IT team getting quite a bit of exercise this morning. Just bear with us for a few moments, and we'll get this fixed where we can hear what
Must be in the auditorium. They're having an issue hearing the audio.
System check, check, check. System check, system check. System check, system check. System check, system check. Check 1 2 1 2. Check, check.
It looks like our IT team has been able to fix the problem. I think that where we left off was taking appearances of council, and that the division is represented. Is JMD represented? Is or anyone else from the other side? Miss Lewis.
Hello. Hi, I am Tanya Lewis from Snell and Wilmer Law Firm, and I'm here on behalf of Wells Fargo Bank, who is the holder of the surety bond.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Well, at this time, I would think that Mr. Lyons, if you want to proceed with your presentation.
Yeah, I will share my screen right now. Bear with me just a second while I find the right one. Share it with you. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we're here due to the division filed a notice of agency action with the board on January 6th, 2021. Is JMD Energy Incorporated the owner and operator of the JMD 12443 well? As a matter that needs to be addressed at the outset, JMD was properly served pursuant to the board's rules and the Utah Rules of Civil Procedure. JMD was served with the NOA by certified mail on January 8th, 2021, confirmation of which was submitted as Exhibit P. JMD has not filed a response or indicated that they will participate in this hearing. Therefore, the division would like to make its motion at the outset that the board enter an order of default in this matter against JMD under Utah Administrative Code Rule 641-104-151.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Lyons, did you say January 6th or January 8th, 2021, when the NOA was filed?
I have here in my notes, it was filed January 6th. It may be the 8th. I have by certified mail, JMD received that NOA.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
So before the board is a motion to enter an order of default against JMD. Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, sir.
Board members, is there a motion to enter an order of default against JMD?
I move that we enter an order of default against JMD.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Discussion, board members? Seeing and hearing none. Julianne, can you take a roll call vote of the board members on this motion? Julie, I think your microphone is muted. Still muted. There you go. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Miss Julianne Carter. I'll give it just a moment. bear with us. We're working on solving this problem as quickly as possible.
Okay. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Vote.
This is Richard Borden. I vote yes.
Mr. Michael Brown, how do you vote?
Mike had to leave to go get his COVID test.
Yeah, Mike may not be with us anymore, so please proceed.
Mr. Steve Church, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Susan, how do you vote?
Susan, could you repeat your vote?
Yes.
Ms. Lavaught Garrison, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chairman Hansen, how do you vote?
Yes.
Gordon, how do
If it's on me, I'm a yes. It's breaking up a little bit.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have 6 affirmative votes.
Thank you. The order has been prepared, is set before me, and I will sign it, and we can proceed. So, Mr. Lyons, if you'd like to go forward with your presentation, please do.
Great. Yeah, and just as a point of clarification for the rest of the board, even though the matter is a default at this point, per board rules, we still need to complete the proceeding and determine all the issues before the board. So I'm going to go through the division's NOA. There are 3 causes of action in this notice of agency action, and I'd like to just briefly cover some facts that led to the filing of the NOA. The initial APD for the subject well goes back to 2010, and there'd been multiple NOVs for reporting surface damage issues, as well as ongoing complaints from the landowner throughout the whole time, which intensified in 2020. Most importantly, for this matter, the division issued JMD and NOV on August 6, 2020, which was submitted as Exhibit M. For the subject well's non-compliance with extended SITA status for pollution and surface damage control due to on-site conditions, and for failing to file monthly oil and gas production reports since March 2020. JMD did not respond to the August 6, 2020 NOV. Therefore, the division elevated it to a division order on December 2nd, 2020. The division ordered JMD to plug and abandon the subject well immediately, to which JMD emailed the division acknowledging the on-site issues while also articulating an inability to cover the cost. In that email, JMD stated, if the best course of action is for DAWGM, the division, to seize the bond, clear the location, and plug and abandon the well, please proceed to do so. And that email was submitted as Exhibit O. So that's just a brief summary of what led to this. And so I'd like to go through these 3 causes of actions listed here. The first, JMD has demonstrated a refusal or inability to conduct plugging and abandonment of the subject well, evidenced by JMD's failure to respond to multiple NOVs, and most clearly in JMD's email response to that December 2nd, 2020 division order stating, if the best course of action is for DAWGM to seize the bond, please proceed to do so. That second cause of action, JMD is in non-compliance with the division's permit conditions because the subject well has been shut in for over a year without an approved shut-in extension. Additionally, JMD has failed to maintain a field presence and maintain a safe and workmanlike location using good housekeeping practices. Further, JMD has failed to file monthly oil and gas production reports since March 2020. That third cause of action, in the event the amount forfeited is insufficient to pay for the full cost of plugging and restoration, the division may recover from the operator all costs of plugging and restoration in excess of the amount forfeited. And I have to tell the board that it appears that the bond will be insufficient. I know that's a question that always comes up in these hearings, is if the division feels like that amount will be enough to cover the bond. And in this instance, it seems like we're going to need to take extra action to recover some of those additional costs. So finally, the relief being requested by the division is well, I should maybe say before going into this, is now a good time to move for admitting all the division's filed exhibits into evidence, Mr. Chairman?
I guess the question would be, do you plan to offer them as evidence as part of your presentation, or do you feel comfortable that the board members have reviewed this and there's no point in offering them currently? Is that your intent? I guess usually we do this at the end of your presentation.
Okay, so I can, if it makes more sense, I'll go through, and this is the last slide for this presentation, and I can make that motion after just going through what the relief requested then, if that's preferable. So just going through this list before you on the screen, the division is requesting 4 actions of the board: to order JMD's interest in the surety bond totaling $30,000 held by Wells Fargo Bank be forfeited and released to the division; to authorize the division to use the forfeited funds to complete the plugging and restoration of the subject well as permitted by Utah Administrative Code Rule 649-3-1.16; and 3, authorize the division to take additional action as necessary to recover any funds required for complete plugging and restoration that may be in excess of the forfeited funds; and finally, to grant further relief that the board deems just and proper. And that concludes the division's presentation in this matter. And as I was just suggesting, maybe the division would make that motion to have the exhibits into evidence.
Okay, I believe I understand that you're asking that the exhibits associated with this matter be admitted. I would like to, before I do that, I think ask if Ms. Lewis is representing Wells Fargo, if she has any comments or presentation in this matter.
No comments or presentations. I think I will have a couple of points of clarification about the logistics of releasing the bond, where to send it, who to send it to, the time frame. But we don't have any comments about Mr. Lyons' presentation. We previously filed a notice of non-opposition to the motion.
Okay, thank you. And board members, do you have any objection to Mr. Borden?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to ask for questions. I continue.
Oh, I don't believe we have any issue with admitting into evidence the exhibits of divisions in this matter, and so they will be so admitted.
I just went over on my workbook. I did this. For a second, I did this.
At this time, I would think that I'm hearing some background. I'm not sure if there's somebody that is trying to make a comment. Guess not. So at this point, I believe that before we conclude this matter, let's hear the questions that Ms. Lewis has regarding the bond and administration of the bond.
Certainly, thank you. I believe my only question is going to be, where would you all like the money sent? Who do we make the check payable to? And is there a specific deadline to release these funds? And the only reason I ask about the timing is that all the employees of Wells Fargo who handle these types of matters are, to my knowledge, working remote. And so in ordinary time, we could probably get this out in 14 days, but things are taking a bit longer, maybe 30. That was my only concern.
Division, I think these are questions that that the division representatives should be able to answer. Mr. Lyons or Ms. Souza, would you like to address those?
As far as sorry, go ahead.
So, Ms. Lewis, there's after a board order is issued, there's an appeal period, and so that's at least 30 days. And so then after that appeal period lapses, then what will happen is that our bonding person, her name is Rachel Medina, she will send you a letter, and it will include all of that payment information about who to send the check to. We are all working in the time of COVID and understand, reasonable delays do happen right now. So,
okay, that sounds good. And forgive my ignorance, but even though the entity it has been defaulted, that appeal period still exists. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Any further questions, Ms. Lewis?
No, sir.
Okay.
I was just gonna clarify, if I may. I can also Ms. Lewis, I can forward you the specific address and who that person needs to go to via email after this hearing, if you'd like.
Very good. Thank you.
No.
Board members, questions for Mr. Lyons or Ms. Lewis? Richard Borden.
Yes, question for Mr. Lyons. You mentioned that the funds were likely going to be insufficient for plugging and restoration. Do you have an estimate for how much this is likely to cost to complete the work?
Yeah, I asked the division staff this question and received a rough estimate upwards of about $100,000.
All right, so a substantial shortfall.
It is. And just as and I asked further clarification that part of the reason why this is here, the division asked for full cost bonding per terms of being in violation of that SITA status. JMD did not comply, and here we are.
Who is JMD?
Thank you.
JMD is the owner and operator of the well, subject to the notice of agency action.
Oh, I see. Oh,
and this is the only well that they operate in the state.
Have we, it seems like we've had a presentation in the last year or two, and this is directed at Bart Kettle. Seems like we've had a presentation in the last year or two on updating bonds, so we won't be in this position again. Isn't that the case, Bart?
Yes, that is correct, Susan. Bonding rule updates were put on hold in the special session, and I wish I could remember the bill right off the top of my head, but rulemaking on that cannot resume until July 1st.
Yeah, I remember that, but this certainly indicates why that's so necessary to happen as soon as possible.
Any further discussion from the board members? Seeing none, Mr. Lyons, would you please restate your motion that you would like the board to act on?
Sure. If it's helpful, I can, I'll share my screen again just so you can see what those.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Those 4 relief requested, yeah. Just a second. Okay, and you can see this. So this is the request to order JMD's interest in the surety bond totaling $30,000 held by Wells Fargo Bank be forfeited and released to the division, to authorize the division to use the forfeited funds to complete the plugging and restoration of the subject well, authorize the division to take additional action as necessary to recover any funds required to complete plugging and restoration that may be in excess of the forfeited funds, and to grant further relief that the board deems just and proper.
Thank you. Could you please leave that on the screen for now?
Yes, sir.
Board members, would you like to move forward on this motion now, or would you like to have a discussion about this matter? Mr. Moon.
Yes. So the documentation indicates there JMD is in bankruptcy. So does the division plan to take further action, against the investors personally to recover funds, or have we reached that decision point yet?
We have not reached a decision point on the next best action to move forward. This is essentially the first step. There are issues with JMD being in bankruptcy, and that's going to need to be sorted out moving forward.
Okay, and I think I saw Haley's hand raised, and I would like to discuss this in a closed setting.
Okay. Any other questions before we go into a closed session? Seeing none, what we will do, I'm sorry, hold on just a moment. Yep. It's not a closed door session, but the board will deliberate on this matter. It's a legal distinction that I am not educated enough to understand or fully comprehend when it's put before me. So we'll go into deliberation. So at this time, I think that the board members, if you would go ahead and move to our Google Meets, and we can discuss this matter further, and we'll come back. We'll go off the record now. After we've had this deliberation, then we will come back and resume and go back on the record. So we'll be back as soon as we're done. near future, that would be wonderful.
Thank you.
We will now move on to the second item on our agenda, which is docket number 2020-034, cause number 476-01, in the matter of notice of agency action by the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining seeking an order forfeiting the blanket bond provided by Westar Exploration Company for multiple subject wells and other relief. This matter has been dismissed. Is there any comment from the division on this, or can we assume that it's been dismissed and we'll move on?
I think it's fair to say that it's been dismissed and we can move on.
Great, thank you. Cross that one off our list. The third docketed item that we have on today's agenda is docket number 2019-027, cause number 194-03, in the matter of the request for agency action of Wesco Operating Inc. for orders authorizing the flaring of gas from the Blue Hills gas plant. This has been an ongoing matter that I think last month we heard Wesco has been working with and on a project to reduce or eliminate their flaring through the Bitcoin mining. I just wish I'd invested in Bitcoin when it was not $50,000 a coin. But I believe what the board is wanting to hear today is progress in this particular matter. And I understand that Wesco is represented here today by Mr. McDonald.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Fred McDonald on behalf of Wesco, and also with me is Mr. Tom Kirkwood, who is the petroleum engineer of Wesco.
Thank you. Division, do you have any anybody who's is here to make any kind of statement, or you're just going to be listening in on the presentation?
The current plan is just to listen to the presentation.
Okay, great. Mr. McDonald, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a quick recap of what has happened here, as the board will recall, the pipeline between the Blue Hill gas plant and the interstate connection was shut down by the Public Service Commission. That continues to be shut down. As a result of that, Wesco had issues of dealing with the gas, and instead of flaring at the various well sites, they sought authorization from the board to be able to flare at the gas plant. And last year, the board authorized that to flare up to 300 MCF per day at the plant through to January 31st of this year. Wesco provided status reports as requested by the board. And coming up to the January deadline, Wesco filed a motion for an extension of that authorization to allow it time to install Bitcoin mining boxes, which would take care of the flaring. The board heard that matter last month, authorized an emergency order to continue to have the authorization to flare up to 300 MCF per day through to this hearing date, and asked that Wesco provide an update of what the situation was. Mr. Kirkwood will provide that. We were also asked to provide, again, the PowerPoint presentation that Mr. Kirkwood provided last month. We had some technical difficulties, and I understand Ms. Davis wasn't available and she would like to see that. So what we'll do at this point is I will turn over to Mr. Kirkwood to make his PowerPoint presentation. The other thing that I want to make sure that the board members have is on Monday we filed an updated status report on the status of flaring through the month of February and through February 19th.
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Borden.
All right, then we'll go ahead. Mr. Kirkwood, I just want to make sure you're available and your sound's good.
Hi, yep, can you hear me?
Yep, good. Okay, I'm going to present now.
I'm sorry. Did you want Mr. Kirkwood to go ahead?
I'm just getting the presentation up.
Okay. Sorry, jumped the gun on you.
Okay, is everybody able to see that presentation?
We're able to
Yes?
see it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Kirkwood, I'm going to turn to the first slide if you want to go ahead and explain what this shows.
So this slide just kind of shows some pictures of the equipment being set and some historic flaring values per day. We in October we put in a small box that kind of a test box to see how everything would work, and then ordered a second one after finding that it was working pretty well. We had a couple of startup issues and some plant operational issues that made January go up. But the new box was delivered in January and has been functioning since. Next slide.
Okay.
Kind of a timeline we have of the new equipment. It was expected to be delivered in December, mid-December. We ended up receiving it the 21st and had to order the additional electrical components to wire it up. We had an initial startup on the 27th of January. However, we had some generator issues that two of our 4 generators had motor issues on them. Those were fixed, and we were able to go into full operation on the 8th of February. From that point on, it was we had basically flared nothing. We had one day where we had a network connection that was basically maxed out the amount on our Verizon modem for network ability, and we had to up our limits, and has been running ever since with zero flaring out at the plant. Next slide. There's just kind of some more pictures and stuff we had to go through. Those are those generators that we use, also an additional one that's not pictured. To get the project going, we had to modify our generators and do some site upgrades. We had network upgrades, which is what I kind of discussed earlier. We've also been able to, the West Coast Dead Horse Lateral, which gathers the gas from the wells and ships it to the plant, has enough volume that it really smooths out flows and allows for small downtime maintenance and stuff like that, just with storage inside the line. Next slide. The main problems that we had overcome for it was the voltage. The miners are made in Malaysia and China and areas over there, so they run off 415 voltage. So you had to do additional changes to your generators. Also had connectivity issues and temperature control. They run very hot, so you have the fan system, cooling systems, almost kind of like a swamp cooler that runs through there. The constant fuel, which has actually been solved by our pipeline. Minor reliability and minor repairs, and we've been able to find a contractor that repairs them relatively quickly, also maintaining a significant amount of extra miners that can be swapped on and off. Banks will be turned on and off based upon the amount of available gas out there. Next slide. I guess for the life expectancy of a miner is about 3 to 5 years, and with us plans to make, if the pipeline still remains closed, and at that point we plan on that for life cycle and have replacements available. if operational issues do arrive out there, the plan is not to do any flaring at the plant itself. It would be done on a well, and it would be for very short periods of time. But under the current regulatory limits, there wouldn't be any issues regarding that at the plant.
So if I can summarize what's happened is you've now installed the larger Bitcoin mining box. You've worked out the initial startup issues, and your plan is that you will not need to flare anymore so long as the equipment operates. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then also that you have redundant systems that if there is repairs that need to be done, you've got the equipment to swap it out and be able to work through that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and as far as if something had to shut down, it would be for a temporary period of time in which it would flare from the individual wells under the current regulatory limitations.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation. If the board has any questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Kirkwood. This is exciting. Use of that gas during this period of time when the pipeline shut down. We appreciate what you've done, but I'm sure that members of the board would have questions and comments. Susan, would you like to go ahead?
I just want to say thank you for looking at alternatives to flaring, and I'm pleased and gratified that this is working out. Congratulations. Looks like a win-win for everybody. The environment, for you, for the pipeline, it looks great.
Thank you.
Board members, any other comments or questions? Again, I think this was very innovative and outside the box thinking that has a positive outcome. I do have a silly question, perhaps. Does the benefit of Bitcoin mining pay better than the sale of the natural gas?
That depends. I mean, right now with where the price is and when the equipment was purchased, it is. It's been a crazy market here in the last months on not only on the Bitcoin side but also on the equipment side. Equipment prices have almost quadrupled since we had invested in them. So it's kind of a timing issue. Worked out good. Replacement will be not as good.
That's
interesting.
Don't send those generators to Texas. They're on their.
Well, again, Mr. Kirkwood and Mr. McDonald, the board appreciates this presentation. Julianne, after this matter was noticed, were there any comments from the public on this?
Yes, there were. We received one comment from Mr. Lionel Trepanier on February 10th.
Yes, this is Gordon Rowe representing the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and I just wanted to make it clear on the record that I received that comment from Mr. Trepanier and responded to it and did not receive a response. So unless he's here now, I think that his public comment was addressed.
Mr. Chairman, if I could address that as well. His objection was basically raising the same issues he had raised in last year's hearing, that flaring would commit waste. But the point being is, with the actions that Wesco is taking, it's eliminated the flaring. And so the bottom line is his objection is moot. And frankly, also just from a legal standpoint, there's nothing more that the board has to do. The authorization is terminated. And hopefully there wouldn't be need for any further authorization for flaring under the circumstances as Mr. Kirkwood has presented.
Yep, we agree. And thank you for that clarification. Well, if there are no other questions or comments about this, the board has no further motions or. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Jahaley, go ahead.
No worries. Thank you, Chair Hansen. I would just like I really appreciate the presentation, and it looks like Wesco has put a lot of thought into how they will remain in compliance in the future. I would just like to encourage Wesco that if plans change and you're not able to flare at the well, to please notify the division as soon as possible. And that is my only comment. Chairman, I'm finished.
We'll definitely keep everyone in the loop if anything does happen.
And that would include, Mr. Chairman, if the fact that the PSC opens the pipeline up again, so that sales can occur as well.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, and I don't think it's been discussed, has anybody heard of any progress on the pipeline matter? Is it any closer to a resolution than last time we spoke?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Chairman. We checked on the PSC website and nothing really has happened. The supposed pipeline owner has tried numerous procedural matters to try and resolve the thing, but the PSC hasn't taken any further action, and it still remains deactivated at this point.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes this matter. Again, thank you for the presentation. Prior to adjourning this hearing, I understand that it may be necessary to go into a closed meeting to discuss strategy pertaining to pending or reasonably imminent litigation. I believe a motion would be in order from the board to allow to go into a closed. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Carter, could you please conduct a roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Richard K. Borden, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen D. Church, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Susan Davis, how do you vote?
Yes.
Ms. Levon Garrison, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Chris Hansen, Chairman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon Moon, how do you vote?
Yes.
Is Mr. Brown back yet?
Yes,
I am, and I vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Chairman, I have 7 affirmative votes.
Thank you. With that, motion having been passed, we will be moving into a closed meeting using our virtual board room, Google Meets. At the conclusion of that closed meeting, the board will reconvene to adjourn. I can't tell you how long that will necessarily take, and we appreciate your patience, Michelle, court reporter, but we're going to go off the record and begin our closed meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I guess I don't understand why we can't adjourn the public meeting since we've done all the public stuff. Maybe that's a question for Mike Begley.
That's probably a good answer coming from Mike Begley.
Yeah, Susan, I wish we could, but because we're still in closed door session and because it was noticed, we have to adjourn after we go into this closed meeting.
Okay. It doesn't bother me, but it just, if there's anybody, I guess like the court reporter, we have to continue to have her here.
We'll just try to make this as fast as we can. That's all we can do.
Okay, no problem.
All right, thank you. And we're off the record, and we will go into our closed meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We've completed our closed door meeting. Michelle, court reporter, are you able to hear? Yep, got the thumbs up. Great. Well, since we have completed that closed door session, the only thing we have left to do is have a motion to adjourn the hearing.
So moved.
I don't think there's a necessity to vote, so we are adjourned until March. Thank you for your attendance and your patience.
Thank you all.